Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sandra Buckley and I run Insync Business Connections. And I help small business owners gain knowledge and collaborate so that they can grow their business. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Alpha Schulter. Is that how I say it?
That's
yes.
good. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you. From Money Made Simple. And she's going to share with us today wealth habits for business owners, which I'm really excited about. So thank you, Alpha. Over to you.
Thanks, Sandra. And hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully this all works nicely. Can everybody see my screen? Yes. Okay, lovely. As you can see, I like color. So I've even got I don't know if you can see my money pig earrings on. I found these in a shop once I live in Bayside, and I saw these. I was like, oh my gosh, these are perfect for me. So I'll go into my next slide there. So I'll dive right in. So money is something that it's part of my journey. My parents immigrated to this country, both quite poor, had to sort of work their way up, and so when they had got themselves to a certain amount of comfort, I just watched them spend. So I then became a saver, and that was my first sort of introduction to money and the sort of the building of the money story. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well, because habits and stories feed in quite closely to one another. And so I didn't sort of realize. So I went down the whole pathway, you go uni, you get an education, you get a job. And then about probably 4 or 5 years into it, I was absolutely miserable. I was working in corporate tax. I didn't really, I enjoyed the colleagues and I liked my workplace, but I just didn't like the work. What I thought I'd be doing, which was working with people, because I've always had this, I like working with people. I like trying to solve problems and help people solve their problems, but I didn't want to turn into sort of like a counselor. That wasn't what I wanted either. And so I started on a personal development journey, which then kind of led me down to sort of some different career paths. And then once I'd built up a little bit of my own financial resources, I was like, well, I have no idea what to do. Like I'm an accountant, but I don't have any idea about personal finance. So I did what I thought everybody is supposed to do. So I found a financial planner, started to go down that path. And probably about 6 months in, I started to have questions. And I thought, he's not really doing the things that I think should be being done. So I started asking my financial planner some questions which he couldn't answer. So anytime I don't know something, I like to go learn about it. So I actually then did the diploma of financial planning, and I got blown away by all the things that we don't get taught or told. I thought, wow, this is ridiculous. There's so much. So this whole journey played out over about 10 years. So it took me a while to get there. So, and I, as I was learning all this, I was like, well, I come from a sort of a finance background, and a lot of this stuff is more confusing than it needs to be. So as I was going on my journey, and my friends were watching me go on this, and so they then started to ask me for help, because they could see the changes I was making. So I then started helping them, and then started helping friends of theirs. And then I thought, this is actually, I really enjoy this. And I feel like there's so much that we don't get taught, and we're kind of kept in ignorance. And to a certain extent, it makes us easier to get sold to, if I'm putting my cynical hat on. And that is just not the way. I'm a big believer in, I don't like the whole kind of, we hoard our information. I think everybody, we can share it. There is more than enough for everyone. I'm a big believer in inclusivity and sharing. And I love the idea of community and trying to consolidate rather than divide. So that's what sort of brought me on this journey. And to be honest, I mainly help women, primarily because when I started out and I kind of was trying to help everybody, I get men asking me about crypto. I was like, that's not what this is about. This isn't about learning about crypto. I'm not a fan of crypto personally. This is about trying to sort of lift the education, and also because access to even financial planning is often financially unreachable for a lot of people, because the way the industry is developed, it's actually quite expensive to even go down that path. And to be honest, there's also fundamentals that kind of almost need to precede that, so that because like me, I was an educated person who still got taken in by a financial planner who was basically a salesperson. person. And when I think back to the amount of fees I was paying, and I was, anyway, so that's sort of what's kind of drawn me down this path. And the other part of it that I've discovered as well, it's very much about what's up here, what's in here, almost before you can even get to the money stuff. So that's what I learned through helping quite a few women along the years, is even if, and I've had actually a few women come to me and they're like, oh, I just can't seem to stick to things. I get to a certain level and then I just fall back. And I was like, that's because you've got stories and identity and beliefs and habits that are connected to a previous version of you. And you will get to that certain point, and that is what you perceive your ceiling to be. And then you'll just keep falling back so that you can reach that ceiling again. We need to make that ceiling your floor so that you can rise again. So that's then where the concept of habits come up. And I'll also talk about beliefs too, because that's a really, really important one, because there's a sense of identity that goes with that. And our habits are the behaviors that kind of reinforce that. So anyway, I won't jump ahead too quickly. So the topics that we're going to cover today, 3 main ones. We'll talk about beliefs and habits. So I'll go through what they are and how to actually start to rewire and change them. So there's a couple of activities as well. You can write them down for later. You don't have to do them right now. But then how to make those changes. And then the commitment is the action part. Very big on, we actually have to come away with things. And for me, the magic number is 3. Any more than that, it feels overwhelming. If I have more than, Sandra and I were talking about this before, the lists. And I was like, if I have to do more than 3 things in one day, my brain feels like it's going to explode. So I try and chunk things down a little bit. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before I get into that though, how does all of this get formed? So when we're children, we're born relatively clean slate. I know there's this concept, oh, children are completely sort of, there's nothing there. There actually is. We do have conditioning. And as women in particular, there's a lot of generational conditioning that is there. It's kind of built into our DNA. So we've also then got to watch the stories that are linked to that get passed down. So that whole, oh, women are bad with money, or men are better at investing, the head for business, there's still some of that trickling through our generations, and it really needs to stop. Even down to the games that children play and the colors, like all of this, we still have so many stereotypes. So it's trying to understand where they come from and how to actually sort of deal with them, because we can't just go, poof, they're gone. It's not quite that simple. So we just have to learn to work around them and understand and recognize. Awareness is absolutely key when it comes to this. So the sense of self, which is our innate identity, who we perceive ourselves to be. And I'm using the word perceive deliberately, because quite often it's a conglomeration of a lot of things that we've been told as children. I was always told as a child I was really shy, but I'm an ambivert. So I was actually, in my case, it was more the fact that I was just unsure in an unfamiliar situation. And once I got older, I realized I'm not actually shy. I'm actually quite outgoing, and I'll chat to anybody, especially when I was traveling. And this is always an interesting thing too. If you notice how you change when you're in your own home environment, in your sort of routine with the people that you're normally around, when you go on holiday, there's a certain liberation that goes with that. And it's not just because of the break in the routine. You can kind of almost be who you want to be and who you really are. So it sort of goes down to that. So our sense of self and identity is actually slightly flexible based on what we choose and what we want it to be. So that's taking that power and that control back. And so the beliefs, which form part of that identity, linked to the behaviors, and the repeated behaviors become our habits. So these thoughts, behaviors are just, and it gets reinforced. So because behaviors, and then people will treat us a certain way, we're like, oh yeah, that's just how we are. Or somebody will tell us something that will reinforce it. And then that goes back to reinforce our sense of self, which then goes, yeah, well, that's what I am, because that's my belief system. And then the behavior, and it just keeps going around and around and around. So we have to find a way to interrupt that loop. And that's what we'll talk about. So beliefs, I'll go through this relatively quickly because I know it's habits, and we'll go into that too. But the sense of identity, again, like I said, imprinted since childhood. There's certain stories that we'll tell ourselves. And these are like physical stories where we'll recount something that happened when we were a kid. Oh, and blah, blah, blah. And the amount of times I was quite chubby as a child. And, that whole, oh, it's puppy fat. Oh, it's a little bit. And so I've had to struggle. Well, I shouldn't say struggle. I've had to be focused probably a little bit too much on weight for many, many years. And to be honest, the less I focus on it, the less it matters. and weight just kind of is not an issue as well. So it's one of these things where if we keep being told something again and again, we believe it to be true. We take it into ourselves, and then our bodies respond accordingly. I was listening to a podcast recently where they were doing a study on all these different diets, like carb loading, proteins, fiber, all of this. And they had people in 3 distinct groups. And I won't go through too much of the detail, but fundamentally, what people thought they were getting and the impact it was going to have on their body is what happened. What they were actually consuming was actually irrelevant. And the guy who was interviewing this fellow who had been part of the study, he was just amazed. He's like, "Are you serious? If I eat," I mean, that's not to say that you eat KFC 24/7 and you'll still be, healthy and happy. There is still some element of nutrition that goes with that, but it was more down to the elements of like the proteins and the carbs and all of that was in there, and what people thought was actually what happened. And I have to admit, I'm like, our mind's really that strong, and if it's repeated enough and the belief is strong enough, they are. Our mind is actually that strong. So that's where that perception. So truth is what we believe to be true, which is an interesting concept because everyone's like, truth is absolute. And it's a conversation that my husband and I often have. And I was like, no, it's not. It's what people believe it to be true. You can look at data and statistics, and you can extract from it whatever you want it to be true based on whatever your biases are. So this is where we have to really be cognizant and aware of what we're telling ourselves. Is it really true for us, or do we want it to be true for us? We get to make that choice. So this then leads to the habits, which are the actual behaviors that we do. And habits in and of themselves are actually really good. So if we can think of like positive habits, like we blink, we swallow, these are bodily functions that we don't even think about. In the morning, we get up, we go to the bathroom, we might, if having a glass of water. I remember once my mum reading a book and said that our brain if we don't have enough water in our body, the brain will take whatever there is and the rest of the organs will get starved. So when you're overnight and you haven't hydrated for 8 hours or so, the first thing you need to do in the morning, is have some water. I always have my glass of water near me. So that becomes a habit. So you put your glass of water next to your bedside table, or I have a bottle because dust and all that. So you can build in habits like that you don't think about. Frees up the brain to focus on other things. So the behaviors that we can do that actually can serve us. There are other habits that are not so great. Snacking in the middle of the night, for example, or, before you go to bed, you're like, oh, I'm a little bit hungry. I might just go to the fridge and see what's in there. That also becomes a habit too. So then there's tasks, and then the thoughts and repeated thoughts, etc. So a lot of these things you can have positive and negative, like anything. The world is a balance. Now, when we get into specifics, so if we look at, so I've got money and mindset habits here because both are extremely important. So if I look at the money side, so this is more the pragmatic. So I'm going to put my sort of more right brain hat on, left brain hat on, sorry. And if you're looking as a business owner, and these are things, they're pretty obvious. There's nothing really outstandingly new about any of this, is paying yourself first. Often hard, especially when, we've got so many bills and there's things going on and we need to make sure, but ultimately you still need to make sure that you've got enough money to put food on the table and operate and function and have your life, have your roof over your head, etc. So one of the things I see quite often with business owners is paying yourself first is one of the things, but particularly super. So the amount of people, especially in small business, I see who don't have enough in super. Even if you can't put the full 10, at the moment employer, the super surcharge is 10.5%. Even if you can't even put that in, put whatever you can in. It's tax deductible. It's also one of the cheapest forms of saving you can do because there's a 15% tax on super funds. Yes, it gets locked away, but that's also a good thing too, because then it's there for retirement. So that's a habit. So getting into the habit of prioritizing that every month and figuring out the percentage. So we work on percentages rather than dollar amounts because obviously as a small business owner, income and profits fluctuate. So whatever percentage that you're going to commit to, do that every month. And then that will become a habit and you can automate that as well, because that's the other thing too, is the structures to put around it. We'll get to that. Knowing your numbers is also then really important. It's very easy to just go, it's just a bit too hard. There's spreadsheets, there's numbers. Every time I mention the word Excel to some clients, they're just like, oh no, you're not going to give me a spreadsheet again, are you? So sometimes now I'll do pretty documents that I create in Canva. Unfortunately, I can't get them to calculate automatically. So Excel's pretty much the best way it can do that, but I try and make them look as pretty and as simple as possible. But knowing, and if you, whatever accounting software you use for Xero or MyOb or whatever, QuickBooks, if you have a bookkeeper, at least have a chat with your bookkeeper to understand the headline numbers. Have a look at your cash statement, have a look at what your profit and loss is, and just understand how that's working, because that is quite important. I had one client who and asked questions. When GST first came in, unfortunately, her bookkeeper put the 10% in the wrong column, so it actually went the other way. So she thought she actually had an extra 10%, so actually ended up amplifying it even more, and ended up creating quite a problem for her. She ended up with such a tax bill. She ended up having, anyway, it was quite dramatic. So ask the question, at least know sort of like your headline numbers and understand what that is, because once you get to know it, like anything, once you know it, it's easier to deal with. So that's, and the other thing I wanted to again, this is really probably quite basic, but I would want to emphasize the difference between revenue and profit. Putting my tax hat on again. So the revenue is obviously just your income that's coming in. Definitely have to be looking more at your profit, and preferably your profit after tax as well, just so that you know what you've actually got left over. And then you start to work your percentages off that. Because unfortunately, we got to pay the tax man first. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's actually a good thing. You're earning enough money to pay tax. That's actually a really good thing. This is another story that we get told, is that, oh my goodness, I've got to do everything I can to minimize tax. We hear about all these business, moguls who have all these accounts and they're avoiding taxes and whatever. It's like, well, to be honest, we all live in a world where the money that's paying for the infrastructure is paid through taxes. And the fact that we can even pay taxes is actually a really, really good thing, because we're making money. So anyway, that's a whole nother tangent I could go on. And then setting financial goals. That also becomes a habit. Doing like a proper planning session, probably like once a year, where you set your goals, and then every quarter doing a review. Whether you do it at the end of a calendar year, I like financial years. I know there's always a lot of stuff to do in July, but January just seems like, I don't know about you guys, but January just seems like a hard month. If you've got young kids, there's still school holidays, you're getting them back to school. Then there's just, I don't know, there's the post-Christmas kind of fog, and everybody's still trying to get it. So I find that time of year a little bit challenging, but it's individual. It's whatever works for you. You could even do it in April if you wanted to, like, as long as you do it every year. And then every quarter, so every 3 months, you go back and you have a look at what you said you wanted to do, what worked, what didn't, and then you have the opportunity to tweak. So you don't wait till the end of the year to go and do your review and go, oh, all right, if I'd done that then, because to be honest, this was something I did last year. I ended up waiting too long to launch the course that I run. And I also neglected, I was just saying to Sandra, I do private coaching, and so far it's just been word of mouth. And then I had somebody just approach me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's actually not on my website. I should probably put it on my website. Stuff like that, where you kind of drop the ball if you don't have it on your list. So it's really important financially and just overarching wise to have goals for your business and the things that you want to do. And more lists, but chunk them down and you do it bit by bit. And then tracking your progress. So we're talking that anyway, that's that. You can do financially, I suggest doing it monthly. Overarching business goals, do them quarterly. Lock it in your calendar. So again, with a habit, you can actually schedule them in. It's not like you've got to suddenly magically your body just knows how to do this. You actually can put structures and processes in place to support the habits that you want. So it's creating the awareness, and we'll go into an activity shortly, of what it is that you want to change. And then you start to write out what you do now, what you want to do, and then you actually can put some structures in place. So for instance, tracking your progress, block out some time in your calendar every month when you know it's not going to be too busy, so that you don't get too overwhelmed by, oh, I can't do it right now, and you just keep pushing it out and out, because that happens. Schedule it. Then we look at the mindset side. I've already talked a little bit about this anyway. Languaging is very important. So I don't know if anyone's read the book by Don Miguel Ruiz, The 4 Agreements. That book, absolutely love it. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's like a rule book, I really feel like, for life. So he has 4 agreements, and watching your languaging is one of them, and the words that you use for yourself. And I even notice it with the words that my daughter uses. She's only 7, so I don't think she quite understands all the concepts I talk about, but I still talk about them anyway. Planting seeds. So if you say, oh, I'm just no good at this. Oh, geez, I've made that mistake again, or oh, this is languaging that you're telling yourself, that you're reinforcing something that you don't want to be true. So watch the words that you use to yourself and also to others. And also, if you've got young children, they are watching the language and listening to the language you use too. My daughter started to use the word hell recently. I have no idea where she got this because I don't say it. I don't think my husband says it. So she's picked it up from somewhere. So they're just like sponges absorbing. So we have to watch the languaging, and we have to also then, I've also said to my mum, call me on when I say things that might just come like a habit. I don't even notice it. If my awareness isn't there, you have full permission to call me on it. So if you have people in your world as well, you don't have to do this all on your own. Ask somebody to help you, and then they can also ask you the same. And it actually is really, really good because it means that we're sharing that kind of load, and we're also sharing the concepts as well, which is, I think, is a lovely idea. Don't make assumptions is another one of the 4 agreements that Don Miguel Ruiz says. And this is, oh my goodness, the power of assumptions is immense, and it swings both ways. And I've put their monies in the follow-up. Never assume that somebody doesn't want what you're offering just because they haven't responded to you. I had a client recently who had said that they wanted to work with me, and then they kind of fell a bit silent. And so rather than getting a bit, oh, no, they don't, they're rejecting me or they don't want to, I actually just reached out and said, are you okay? I just wanted to, no expectations, but I didn't say it quite like that. But it was like, I just wanted to check you're okay. Turns out they were going through a relationship breakdown that had come quite suddenly, and they were feeling really overwhelmed. And they said, oh, I'm going through a bit of a rough patch. Can you get back to me in a week? I ended up giving them 2 weeks. And then when I got back to them, I said, oh, thank you for getting in touch with me again. Let's book in our session. So don't assume that what somebody's thinking, and this just goes for life in general. This is even just about business. The amount of disagreements and miscommunications that happen due to assumptions is huge. And I think the world personally would be a happier place if we didn't assume quite so much about one another. And then focusing on your habits. So there are more 4 agreements in there. I won't go through the whole book. So the other thing is then focus. So that's a really big part of creating the awareness. We won't get awareness if we don't have focus. So it's interesting. I had a bit of a trend last year. For everywhere I went, I was at a lunch one time, and somebody had a book in their stroller with their little baby, and it was on the power of focus. I was like, are you kidding me? I just ordered that book from the library to go read it. And then something else was about focus, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is everything I'm reading and seeing at the moment is about focus. So I'm focusing on focus. So focus is really, really important. You kind of have you noticed if there's a car that you're interested in, you'll start to see it everywhere. And it's quite amazing how that happens. So what we focus on, we also attract. So I would suggest focusing on your habits. And this is, again, we'll get to in the activity too, but minimum 30 days. And again, track your progress. So a lot of this is about tracking progress, because one of the things that creates depression and anxiety is we see this chasm between where we are now and where we want to be. And that just kind of goes, oh my gosh, I'm just so far away. How is this ever going to happen? Rather than looking back and going, okay, I've actually come a pretty fair way. Like you need to actually acknowledge that, and tracking progress is really the only way to do that. And again, I'll have a slide to cover that too. But it's very important to track your progress, both on your financial habits and goals for your business and personally, and also for your mindset and the things that you want to achieve. And because we're not all going to get everywhere instantly. It's a journey. And the fact that we're imperfect kind of makes the journey a little bit more interesting, frustrating, but more interesting. And it gives us more personality in the process and wisdom. So how do you replace a habit? And I use the word replace also quite deliberately, because creating a habit from scratch is almost impossible, because our lives are quite full. So unless we create space, how else are we going to put something else in? So we usually need to change something in order to, and then replace it. So it's not necessarily doing something new unless we've stopped something entirely and we want to do something else, but we're technically still replacing. So, and there's a saying I heard years ago that the universe abhors a vacuum. It's a little bit like a handbag. If the handbag gets bigger, we just fill it with more stuff. So we have a smaller handbag, we manage to go with less stuff. So that's just, that emptiness just gets filled. So this is something you can do. I would suggest, this will get released afterwards as well. So, but if you want to write this down, you can make a list. So if you have a think about it, and you can go through your day as well, and you might not necessarily be able to write the list straight away anyway. You might need to go through a day where you go, okay, what do I do in the mornings? What do I do? What's my routine? How do I go about my day? What thoughts am I thinking? So this isn't just about physical habits. This is also about mental habits. The things that we say, I catch myself out constantly as well. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I did that again. So I need to actually physically write it down. I'm a big fan of pen and paper. There's something neurologically that happens when we're physically holding a pen between our thumb and our index finger or our fingers and actually physically writing it down. So typing is okay, but the thing that makes us humans is our opposable thumb, and you use that to hold a pen. So I'm a big believer in pen and paper. So once you've made that list, it'll probably be, it could probably be a little bit long, depends. Start to prioritize them. So which ones are the most important that you want to deal with first? And again, here's my magic 3. Pick your top 3 to focus on. Be consistent and discipline. It's boring. I get, yeah, it's not a sexy thing, which is why not many people talk about it, but there is magic in consistency and discipline. And it does actually feel really good. If you know anything about the Stoics, very big on the concept of discipline and consistency. And it does get you where you need to go. And you can even be disciplined with fun. Like my husband always jokes, he's like, you schedule in fun. I'm like, yeah, because if I don't, it doesn't happen. So I was like, and you can even schedule in white space. So you schedule in time where you have nothing. And it's up to you what you then do with it. And that's when inspiration happens, which is why quite a lot of the time we're inspired in the shower because we can't do anything else. Ideas just kind of come to us. We don't even need to schedule that in because showering, hopefully for most people, is a habit. So this is the process I go through with clients when we're trying to readjust habits. And then again comes that tracking your progress as well, because it's very easy to tick something off the list and it's done and forgotten, rather than kind of coming back to it and going, wow, I've actually done quite a lot. I still have a lot to do, but I've done a lot already. So the other thing too, and this is something that I've heard a lot recently too, is linking something to an emotion. When we have a reason to do something, we're invested in it emotionally, it is a lot easier to do. So for instance, this is a bit of a funny one. I'm off to see, I haven't been to see my father-in-law. He lives in Germany for 5 years because of, what's been happening over the last few years. And where we're going, he lives by a lake. It's going to be in summertime. We're going to go down to Italy for a bit as well, and lots of lakes. And it's like, oh goodness, there's going to be lots of swimsuit wearing. I really need to start, getting my stomach a bit more toned. So I've now got like an emotional reason to do a little bit more toning, which is really motivating. Like I have not missed because I cycle quite regularly. So I already have an exercise routine, but it's not very much on the toning, the upper body and all of that. So, but I'm motivated. I have to figure out another way to stay motivated when we come back from the trip. But that's, so when you create an emotion to it, it makes it so much easier, so that when it's, the alarm rings in the morning, you're like, oh, do I really want to get out of bed? And I was like, I can envision the reason I'm doing it, and that gets me out of bed. So that just makes it a little bit easier to understand. As human beings, we are very emotional, and we do often need reasons to do things. So connect your habits, especially the bigger ones, that are going to take a little bit more of a shift to some sort of an emotion. All right, so this is where I'm talking about. I like visuals. So this is the process of following the steps. So ultimately, the habits are just individual steps that want to lead you to an ultimate goal. And that's not to say once you reach the goal, you're like, done and dusted, that's it. I don't need to do anything anymore. I can just go, retire on a beach. We're going to have many, many goals. And the goals you'll probably actually find by the time you get to near the goal, you're like, oh, that goal's too small now. I need to keep moving, especially if you've been working on your mindset and your beliefs and your habits, because you'll have grown as a person. And I was having this conversation with a friend of mine recently. She's a florist, and she's done some amazing things in her business, and she's been in business for 9 years. And since I've started mine, we're kind of the only two in our friend circle who have businesses. So we sort of, share our wins and share our, oh, this is challenging moments together, which is actually really good. And we were talking, and I said to her, I said, you know what? Your ceiling has now become your floor. And she's like, it was just this moment of recognition as we were talking about all the progress that she's made. And she's like, I'm not the same person I was when I started this business. And I said, it's really important to acknowledge that and actually look at the steps that you've taken and the things that you've done. But you've also then got to recognize that what got you here won't get you there. So you then have to up level again and go, okay, so then it becomes uncomfortable again because she'd gotten to the point where it was comfortable. So being in business is discomfort. And I seriously think it is the biggest personal development journey ever. You get confronted with so much when you're in business, so many things you have to push through. So your beliefs and your habits become even more important. And so that's where that's becoming your emotionally invested, and that consistency and that discipline, whatever you are committing to do to yourself, you are committing to do it. If you need an accountability partner, find one. I have one client who she won't do it for herself, but she will do it because she said to me, I'm going to do it, and she doesn't want to let me down. I was like, great, that's awesome. That's how you work. I personally, if I make a commitment to myself, I will do it. But that's just how I work. So understanding how we work is also very important. And then what will need you to get somewhere. And you don't always need to pay a coach to have an accountability partner. You can have a friend do it for you as well. Whoever you admire or trust enough to say that if you commit something to them, and you say to them, look, you check back on me to make sure I've done it, I will do it because I've told you I will. So that part's really important, but then to acknowledge the steps too, because that progress is incredibly important to acknowledge. So I'll just do a bit of a recap of what we've talked about. So beliefs form your identity. Your repeated behaviors that connect to your identity and your beliefs become your habits. And if you want to adjust or change any of these, you're going to have to be consistent and disciplined with that change for at least 30 days. It probably will take longer, but just commit to it for the first 30 days, and then you can do the next 30 days. This is sort of more about the concept of chunking, how long we think we can stick to something. And then when it comes to your money, look at your numbers, make sure you understand them. And if you don't, ask the question. It is okay. It's okay to not know. We don't get taught it. It's not something that comes up really anywhere. Again, I've got a friend who's studying bookkeeping at the moment, and she's just like, oh my gosh, she came to me with one of her assignments and we tried to figure it out. And I have to admit, I was just like, I don't even understand some of these things. Did they define what this means? Because the way they've asked the question is different from the way I understand it. So it's okay to be curious and ask questions, because if we're not, then we're not learning and we're not growing. And then having that concept of looking at your progress for your money and your mindset, and I focused a lot on the mindset side here, because that really is really important. Because the money side, a lot of it is very just pragmatic, tick and flick, because you've got your superannuation, you've got all your expenses that you need to pay. You can look through your expenses. I do what I call an expenses diet once a year. So I'll go through and I'll review all of my insurances. I did that last year with my business insurances as well. I actually went to a different broker, asked them to go out, because I sit a little bit outside the box as well. So there's only certain brokers who'll even work with me. So he had a little bit of a look around, could find. So I do this process. I do it every year around May. And that's just something I do now. And then even in my home life as well, I look at all our insurances here as well, because that's usually where you find the most savings. But then I'll also look at spend creep and other things. You can look at spend creep in your business in the amount of subscriptions. Oh my goodness. And pretty much all of them are in US dollars. So of course the exchange rate's not helping that right now. So I go back and look at them. Can I pay for something on an annual basis? Will I save a bit of money? Do I really need that level? Can I go maybe down to basic instead of pro, like that kind of stuff? There's certain things that you can start to look at, and again, build that habit into your business of reviewing your expenses you could do it 6 monthly, you can do it annually, and then have like your net worth as well, which is where your business comes into it too. So having that habit, I do that once a year. And have a look through my whole net worth, just to sort of see where things are going. I have a look at the progress of investments, all of that kind of thing as well. And then the action to this is committing to 3 habitual changes over the next 30 days. So that's pretty much the bulk of it. There is quite a lot in there. But from a habits perspective, really just focus on 3. Write out your list first though, because it will actually be quite interesting, because you'll start to question and you'll go, okay, well, what do I do and why do I do it? Why do I do it this way? And one of the things I've noticed the most with my daughter, and I really encourage curiosity, and she comes out with some amazing ways to look at things that are totally different from the way I do. And ever since she was really little, I tell her she's really good at problem solving. So whenever there's something that doesn't quite work, she's like, Mama, let's problem solve this. And then we'll go through it. And I'm very conscious of the language And when I say something to her, and sometimes I'm like, oh dear, I can't believe I just said that. Like, I hope I'm not screwing her up for life. I was like, if I've said it once, hopefully it won't stick. And I have to be conscious to not say it again. So really that languaging is very important. So that's really the crux of it in terms of habits. They're simple, but humans, we're complex and we revert to familiarity. So keeping that in the back of your mind, and if the familiar is not serving you, you need to put an extra level of effort into adjusting that and recognizing that you might need to go to bed a little earlier because it probably will drain some energy. And focusing on that energetics is also very important, and making sure that you've got the people around you to help you support that new identity, because it does. I've lost friends. I've had family who we're not as close as we were because of the changes that my life has taken. And that's okay. That's all right. I've had probably the most dramatic was a friend who I thought was quite close, was very judgmental about when I left corporate tax. And at the time I was just like, what? And when I look back on it now, I think there was probably a certain amount of fear she had perhaps for me that I would fail. And while probably coming from a good place, it wasn't helpful for me. Thankfully, I didn't really feel it all that much because I really, really was, well, I hesitate to use the word depressed, but I was getting down that path. So I just did whatever I needed to do to get out of that environment. So for me, I didn't actually take that too much to heart, but it did sort of, there was a grieving period for the friendship that wasn't there anymore. And again, now I look back on it, I was like, she just, our paths just went in different directions, and that's okay. So being able to release people from your life is probably going to be part of the journey. Not always pleasant, but it's likely to happen. Just as a forewarning, you probably know this already, but and just in terms of, if you're interested, I just thought I'd put this out there as well, because I recently did this because I realized I didn't have all this particularly clear, is different ways that I work with people. So I generally work more sort of person to person, but I also have found a lot of my clients now are starting their own businesses. So I'm starting to work more with people developing businesses as well. So what I start with is just a clarity chat, because I often find the concept of money so overwhelming that you don't even really know where to start. And quite often people don't necessarily need anything. They just need to trust themselves and to get their own sort of stuff in order before they even go down the path of doing a program or a course. They might even just need to read a couple of books first to get started. And I have a stack of books I recommend depending on where people are at in their journey. The Alchemist is another one that I love. That's a really good one for helping people understand or start to dream, because I think we've also lost the ability to dream and imagine and to sort of have stories. And then values discovery. Values is something that that's like one of the first things I do with people is understand their values. I have a process that I go through for it, and it's very enlightening. I even had one client want to bring her husband along, and he literally sat there like this for about 20 minutes, and I noticed the body language start to change. And at the end of it, they were both like, that makes so many things make sense as to why we are fine with some things and conflict on other things, because the way that what they valued and having that awareness now, like when I discovered my top value is creativity, and discernment and control are my other two. And so I struggled a lot through COVID because there wasn't a lot of opportunity for discernment or control of your own life, or even a lot of creativity. But then I was like, well, hang on a minute. If creativity is one of your core values, get creative. And as soon as I did that, it's like, oh, okay, the whole thing switched. So you can use them to help make decisions. Anyway, so I use values discovery. That's probably one of the foundational things I do. And I also do private coaching, quite personalized, but I have a process, a money process that I sort of structure it around to help create some guidance. And then I do a group coaching program, which is opening again. I only open it for enrollments 3 times a year. It's opening again in March. I have a wait list. If you're interested, there's a wait list, and there's a discount for anybody on the wait list as well. So that will be opening on the 20th of March for enrollments. So you have to get on the wait list before that. So that's basically me. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me anything.
That was awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
So with the making a list, So
Yes.
you mentioned make a list of everything that you do during the day. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So if you have a look at it depends on how you structure your weeks. Like if you do something on a weekly basis, look at your weeks, but look at the key things, like the key habits, or the activities, routines that you have, even the thoughts that you think. And those ones you kind of have to catch yourself on as you're thinking them. Because quite often we're not really aware of it. It's a little bit like, when my daughter, she was saying something quite regularly. I was like, where did you get that? And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I say that. So quite often we're not even aware of it. So it's tuning your awareness. So yeah, so it's the things that you do on a daily basis in your business. Is there something that you do before a client? Is there something that you do in the morning? If you're feeling a level of procrastination, like lean into it. What is causing that procrastination? Look at your, if you're resistant to the numbers, try and look at the stories and the beliefs behind why you're resistant to the numbers, because the numbers will help give you clarity and they help you then make decisions. But if you've been told that you're not good with numbers, or I had one say, oh, I'm no good at Excel. I was like, well, that's pretty easy to fix. Like that, I can show you how to use Excel. But that's not the problem. The problem is why you think you're not good at Excel. So it's dialing into that, and then start to write it down. Even if you don't think it's a habit, just write anything down, and then you'll start to realize, you'll start to pick out the things that are repeated, and that's where the habits are. And then and then just highlight the ones and try and do it at a time when you're not rushed, and then this is going to sound quite woo-woo, but when your energy can just start to really just dial into almost in a slightly meditative state, where you this is what I do with the value session. I literally go really fast because I want people to switch off their brains. The more time we give ourselves, the more we think. The more we think, the more we go into should, could, would, all the things that kind of come up in our conditioning. So you can kind of do it, highlighter, and then just start highlighting the ones that really stand out. And they're the ones that I would suggest focusing on, but then bring it back to the first 3.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, or in the chat if people?
Spreadsheet, sorry, I just saw that.
Yes. Jackie. Hi, Jackie.
Can you send me your contact details again? I didn't catch it when you put it on the screen, because
sure.
I might have clients I could send your way and say, please.
Sure. I'll just I'll put my website in the chat.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
cool, thank you.
But yes, no, spreadsheets, and it's an interesting one, because I was like, we don't really do spreadsheets at school, so you're kind of like, well, where does that develop? And it's often just a concept, because it's literally just a blank screen that you type things in, and then you can do some formulas. And again, once you learn it, once you know, it's like my daughter at the moment is learning to read and write, and she's like, oh, Mum, I don't know it. I'm like, yeah, but once you do, you do. It's the type of thing that once you know it, you can't unlearn it. So it's just a matter of knowing it first. It's like anything. You get a new device and you got to learn how to use the device. Once you've learned it, it's easy.
But they also assume it's harder than it actually is. If you give someone a bit of paper and you draw a grid on it, they won't have any problems writing numbers in the boxes. But somehow you put it on a screen and it's completely different. Like,
yeah,
it's exactly the same.
That's it. Yeah. It's just, again, it's that perception of, and that we have. And to be honest, I've never had a single male client who has a problem with spreadsheet. Whereas all my female clients, pretty much, I probably have that minority who actually don't mind spreadsheets. But it's really interesting. I was like, where is that conditioning coming from? We need to bust out of it. I'm actually reading a book at the moment by Rachel Rogers called We Should All Be Millionaires. And oh my goodness, this woman, she's a firecracker. I've literally just read the introduction and I'm already like, oh my God, she's on this revolutionary mission about, to bust all these myths and this conditioning. And I was like, okay, all right, let's, I'm probably not like that extreme, but there is just an awareness and just understanding of where we're at and why it's important to create.
Awesome. I'm just going to stop the recording now.